The void was supposed to be silent. But aboard the reconnaissance vessel Tarsal Vanguard, silence had a rhythm. Soft pulses of scanning arrays, the whisper of quantum sensors brushing against the fabric of space itself. It was routine. Predictable. Safe. Commander Varel Korin stood at the center of the observation chamber, his elongated fingers clasped behind his back as he stared at the blue-green planet rotating slowly on the main display. Primitive, one of the officers muttered. No one disagreed. For over a century, the Kelverin Dominion had monitored this system. Catalogued it. Measured it. Judged it. Humans. A volatile species. Emotionally unstable. Technologically inconsistent. Their history was a mess of internal wars, fractured alliances, and weapons that bordered on self-destruction. Projectile-based firearms. Fission warheads. Early-stage energy weapons. Crude. They still rely on kinetic munitions in some regions, another officer added, a faint note of amusement in his voice. Even their orbital defenses are inefficient. Varel didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the planet. Earth. A world rich in resources but burdened by its inhabitants. The Dominion had long debated whether to absorb the system or simply ignore it. So far, the conclusion had remained unchanged. Not worth the effort. Status report, Varel said calmly. Long-range scans complete. No significant fleet activity detected, replied the sensor chief. One vessel in orbit of their outer moon. Minimal escort. Likely a patrol craft. Display it. The main screen shifted. A single human warship came into view, suspended in the darkness beyond the planet's gravitational well. At first glance, it looked unremarkable. Angular. Compact. Functional. Designation unknown, the officer continued. Hull composition appears standard. No visible heavy weapon arrays. Energy output within expected parameters. A faint ripple of disinterest moved across the bridge. Typical, someone said. They haven't advanced much. Varel tilted his head slightly. Run a deeper scan. A pause. Commander, it's unnecessary. Run it. The officer hesitated, then complied. Initiating full-spectrum analysis. The ship hummed softly as enhanced scanners activated, sending layered waves of detection through the void, probing, dissecting, unraveling every measurable detail of the human vessel. Seconds passed. Then, that's not possible. The words were quiet. Too quiet. Varel's eyes narrowed. Report. The sensor officer didn't answer immediately. His hands moved rapidly across the console, rechecking data, recalibrating inputs. No, this has to be an error. Officer. The tone sharpened. The bridge fell completely silent. Slowly, the officer turned. And for the first time since entering human-controlled space, fear crept into his expression. Commander, the readings, they don't match the exterior. Varel stepped forward. Explain. The display flickered as layers of data began to unfold across the screen. Internal scans, energy signatures, structural density maps. What appeared was wrong. Terribly wrong. The ship was not small. It only looked that way. Beneath its outer hull existed a compressed lattice of impossible density. Internal mass readings rivaling that of a capital-class war fortress. Energy signatures spiked erratically, not unstable, but restrained. Contained. Power output is being suppressed, the officer said, voice tightening. Deliberately. Varel felt a subtle tension coil in his chest. By how much? A long pause. Then. We estimate less than 3% of its total capacity is currently active. Silence. Someone laughed nervously. That's absurd. No vessel. It gets worse, the officer interrupted. The display shifted again. New data flooded in. Weapon systems. Not visible externally, but embedded, folded, hidden within layers of the ship's structure. Dozens. No, hundreds. Internal weapon arrays detected, the officer continued, his voice barely steady now. Gravitic launch systems, directed energy channels, unknown configurations. I can't classify half of them. Varel stared at the screen. His mind, trained over decades of command, began assembling the implications. A vessel that concealed its true size, its true power, its true purpose. Is it armed? He asked quietly. The officer swallowed. Commander. Another pause. Then the words that shattered the calm of the bridge. It's not a patrol ship. Varel didn't blink. What is it? The officer's hands trembled slightly as he brought up the final layer of analysis. The answer appeared in cold, unforgiving data. It's pretending to be one. The void outside remained unchanged. Silent. Still. But something had shifted. Varel Corin felt it, not in the sensors, not in the data, but in instinct. For the first time since observing humanity, the Dominion had not found a primitive species. They had found something else. Something that had been hiding, watching, waiting. And now, they had just noticed they were no longer alone. For several long seconds, no one on the bridge spoke. The human vessel remained suspended in the void, motionless, silent, ordinary. And yet, everything about it was wrong. Commander Varel Corin stepped closer to the central display, his sharp eyes scanning the cascading streams of data. Run it again, he said. We already have, Commander, the sensor officer replied, voice strained. 3 times. Different frequencies. Different angles. And? The officer hesitated. It gets worse each time. A subtle shift moved through the bridge crew. Not panic, not yet. But something close. Expand the internal structure, Varel ordered. The holographic model of the human ship rotated slowly, then peeled apart layer by layer. What had once appeared as a compact patrol craft unfolded into something far more complex. No. Far more deliberate. Outer hull is a decoy shell, the officer explained. Minimal density, standard alloys, designed to appear insignificant. The display flickered again. Beneath that shell, another layer emerged. Thicker. Darker. Secondary hull composition, unknown composite, the officer continued. It's not absorbing energy readings, it's dispersing them. Varel's gaze sharpened. Define. When we scan it, the officer said, the energy doesn't reflect back normally. It spreads. As if the material itself is redirecting the scan across its surface. A defensive system. But not a passive one. This was something designed to confuse, not just protect. Armor thickness. Varel asked. The answer came after a delay. Inconsistent. Inconsistent. Yes, Commander. Certain sections are reinforced beyond capital class standards, others appear deliberately weakened. Varel's fingers tightened slightly behind his back. Why would they do that? The officer hesitated. To bait targeting systems. Silence. The implication settled like a weight across the bridge. The ship wasn't just armored. It was designed to manipulate enemy fire. Varel exhaled slowly. Continue. The display shifted again, deeper now. Past the armor. Into the core systems. Energy readings are staggering, the officer said. We initially assumed a standard fusion reactor. That was incorrect. The hologram zoomed inward. At the center of the vessel. Something pulsed. Not like a reactor. Not like anything they had seen before. Multiple energy sources, the officer said. Layered. Redundant. Interlinked. How many? Varel asked. We've identified at least 9. A murmur spread across the bridge. 9 power cores. No warship required that much energy. Unless it was built for something far beyond conventional warfare. Output capacity. Varel pressed. The officer hesitated again. We cannot calculate it. That got Varel's full attention. Cannot, or will not. The officer turned, his expression pale. Commander, the readings exceed our predictive models. A quiet, creeping unease began to take hold. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was outside expectation. Proceed to weapons, Varel said. The hologram shifted once more. At first, nothing. No visible cannons. No mounted arrays. No external launch systems. Just smooth, unbroken surfaces. Where are they? Varel asked. The officer swallowed. They're inside. The display fractured. Segments of the ship opened virtually, revealing hidden compartments, folded structures embedded deep within the hull. And then, they appeared. Weapon systems. Hundreds of them. Primary armaments, the officer said, voice tightening. Gravitic accelerators, capable of launching projectiles at relativistic speeds. Varel's mind calculated instantly. Even a single hit could cripple a dreadnought. Secondary systems, the officer continued. Directed energy emitters. Output levels, far beyond standard plasma weaponry. The data scrolled faster now. More systems. More layers. More impossibilities. Missile bays detected. Internal storage capacity in the thousands. Warhead signatures include. He stopped. Varel turned his head slightly. Include what? Unidentified spatial distortion signatures. Silence. Explain, Varel said quietly. The officer's voice dropped. The warheads don't detonate in a conventional manner. They appear to destabilize localized space. A chill ran through the bridge. Weapons that didn't just destroy, but unmade. Varel stared at the display, his thoughts moving faster now. This wasn't escalation. This was overkill. Is that all? He asked. He already knew the answer. The officer shook his head slowly. No, Commander. The hologram shifted again. Deeper. Into systems that were not meant to be seen. Secondary deployment units, the officer said. Autonomous. Drones. Varel asked. Not exactly. The first schematic appeared. Small. Compact. Fast. Boarding constructs, the officer explained. Equipped with mono-edged molecular blades, adaptive targeting, self-learning combat routines. Varel's expression hardened. Ship-to-ship combat was one thing. But this was personal. Continue. The next layer appeared. And this time, even the officer hesitated to speak. Nanite systems, he said finally. The word hung in the air. Function. Varel asked. The officer's voice was barely above a whisper. Consumption. No elaboration was needed. The bridge felt colder. And then, the final layer. The officer didn't speak immediately. He simply brought it onto the screen. At first, it looked like a containment chamber. Then the data resolved. Biological components. Cybernetic integration. Weapons, fused directly into living tissue. Varel's eyes narrowed. What is that? The officer hesitated. Then, designation translated from human encoding. A pause. As if even reading it was wrong. Revenant units. No one moved. They are soldiers, the officer continued. Or what remains of them. Reconstructed. Augmented. Weaponized. Varel felt something unfamiliar stir in his mind. Not fear. Not yet. But something close. Purpose? He asked. The answer came slowly. They are deployed into hostile environments where survival probability is irrelevant. Silence swallowed the bridge. This was no longer a warship. It was something else entirely. A system. A doctrine. A statement. Varel exhaled slowly, forcing his thoughts into order. Summarize. The officer looked at him, eyes unsteady. This vessel is not designed for standard engagement. Varel waited. The officer swallowed. It is designed to endure anything. A long pause followed. Then, quietly, and destroy everything. The void outside remained unchanged. The human ship still drifted in silence. Unmoving. Unthreatening. But now, the illusion was gone. Commander Varel Korin understood something in that moment that would change everything. This was not a patrol craft. Not a scout. Not even a warship in the traditional sense. This was a message. And they had just read it. But the most unsettling realization came next. Varel's gaze returned to the data. To the suppressed energy levels. To the hidden systems. To the overwhelming force contained within that single vessel. And a single thought formed. Slow. Unavoidable. Terrifying. If this was what the humans showed on the surface, then what, in the depths of their space, were they hiding? The silence didn't last. It shattered. Commander. The sensor officer's voice cracked across the bridge, sharp and uncontrolled. All scanning arrays just got blocked. Varel's head snapped toward him. Blocked. Yes, no, overwritten, the officer corrected, hands flying across the console. Our signals aren't returning. Something is intercepting them. A cold weight settled in Varel's chest. That's impossible, another officer said. Our scans are passive. They were, the sensor chief whispered. The main display flickered. For a brief moment, the human vessel vanished. Then reappeared. Closer. No. Not physically closer. But clearer. As if something had adjusted their perception. Commander, the navigation officer said slowly, we're no longer observing them. Varel's eyes narrowed. They're observing us. The words landed like a strike. Before Varel could respond, every console on the bridge froze. Then, one by one, they went dark. Total blackout. A heartbeat of pure silence followed. Then, the screens came back online. But they weren't showing Kelvin systems anymore. They were showing something else. A single line of text. Translated instantly by their universal interface. Unidentified vessel. You are being monitored. No one moved. No one breathed. Varel stepped forward slowly, his voice low but controlled. Source. The communications officer swallowed. It's embedded in our systems. Not transmitted through standard channels. How? I don't know. A faint pulse echoed through the ship. Not physical. Not audible. But felt. Then, another line appeared. You have been scanning a Terran military asset. The word hit harder than expected. Terran. Official designation. Not human. Not primitive. Structured. Organized. Military. Varel's mind raced. Cut all scanning systems, he ordered immediately. They're already offline, the officer replied. We didn't shut them down. Something else had. The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop. Shields? Varel asked. Active, but fluctuating, came the reply. We're being mapped. Varel's gaze snapped back to the main display. The human ship had not moved. It still hung there, silent. Still. Watching. Then. The final line appeared. State your intent. The message wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it carried something far more dangerous. Certainty. Varel inhaled slowly, forcing calm into his voice. Open a channel. A pause. Commander. The communications officer hesitated. They've already opened one. The realization hit instantly. They weren't requesting contact. They had already established it. Varel stepped forward. Then respond. A soft click echoed. The channel was live. For a moment. Nothing. Then. A voice. Cold. Measured. Controlled. Unidentified vessel, it said. Perfectly translated. You are operating within observation proximity of a Terran military installation. The bridge crew froze. Installation. Varel's eyes flicked back to the display. The single ship. That patrol craft. Identify yourselves, the voice continued. There was no distortion. No delay. No uncertainty. Just precision. Varel straightened. This is Commander Varel Korin of the Kelvin Dominion. We mean no hostility. Our presence is observational. A pause followed. Long enough to feel deliberate. Then. Observational, the voice repeated. There was something in the tone now. Not anger. Not confusion. Something else. You deployed 12 layered scan frequencies, including deep structure analysis. The bridge went still. They knew. Someone whispered. Varel didn't react outwardly, but inside. The realization struck hard. Every move. Every scan. Every attempt to remain hidden. Seen. Catalogued. Understood. We are conducting standard reconnaissance, Varel replied evenly. Another pause. Then. A faint shift. Not in the voice. In the ship. The human vessel pulsed. A ripple of energy spread across its surface. Subtle. But unmistakable. Commander, the tactical officer snapped. Energy spike detected. How much? Rising. Varel's gaze locked onto the display. Shields to maximum. They're already at maximum. Then reinforce. They won't hold if that output continues. Silence crashed down again. Then, the human voice returned. Calm. Unhurried. You are currently targeted. Every system on the Kelverin ship lit up at once. Alarms screamed. Multiple locks, the tactical officer shouted. No, correction, hundreds. Varel's pulse surged. Evasive maneuvers. We can't. Why not? Because they've already predicted them. The display filled with trajectories. Dozens. Hundreds. Every possible movement path. Already mapped. Already counted. Varel stared. This wasn't targeting. This was inevitability. They're not aiming, the officer whispered. They're deciding. A beat passed. Then another. No weapons fired. No attack came. Just silence. And control. Then. The voice spoke again. I suggest, it said calmly, you reconsider your current position. Varel felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear. Not exactly. Something deeper. Recognition. They were outmatched. Completely. Utterly. And the humans knew it. We will withdraw, Varel said carefully. Immediately. Another pause. Then. Good. The word was simple. But the implication behind it. Absolute. The targeting systems remained locked. Unmoving. Unforgiving. Turn the ship, Varel ordered quietly. The navigation officer complied instantly. The stars shifted. Engines hummed. Still. No attack. Still. No movement from the human vessel. As if. It didn't need to move. Jump drive charging, the engineer called out. Varel kept his eyes forward. Do not deviate, he said. Maintain course. The seconds stretched. Every one of them heavy. Measured. Watched. Then, just before the jump, the human voice returned one last time. Commander Varel Corin. Varel froze. They knew his name. We are aware of your species, the voice continued. Your history. Your capabilities. A pause. Then, a shift in tone. Slight, but unmistakable. Choose your next actions carefully. The jump drive engaged. Reality folded. Stars stretched into lines. And then, they were gone. Silence filled the bridge once more. But it was different now. Not calm. Not routine. Heavy. Oppressive. Varel stood motionless, staring at the empty void where the human vessel had been. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, the sensor officer whispered. They let us go. Varel didn't answer immediately. His mind replayed everything. The scans. The systems. The control. The certainty. And that final line. Choose your next actions carefully. This wasn't mercy. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't even intimidation. It was something far worse. Understanding. The humans hadn't spared them because they were weak. They had spared them because they weren't worth killing. Yet, Varel exhaled slowly. And for the first time in his long career, he felt it. Not doubt. Not confusion. But something far more dangerous. Clarity. We are returning to Dominion space, he said finally. No one argued. No one questioned. Because every being on that bridge understood the same thing. They had just encountered something they did not understand. Something they could not defeat. And something that had barely begun to show its true power. The jump ended with a violent ripple. Stars snapped back into place. Reality stabilized. And the tarsal vanguard emerged into the quiet safety of Kelvin-controlled space. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then the bridge erupted. System check. Stabilizers holding. Shields recovering, minor fluctuations only. Drive integrity at 93%. The noise came all at once, a desperate return to normalcy. To control. To something familiar. Commander Varel Korin didn't join them. He remained still at the center of the bridge. Silent. Watching. Commander, the communications officer said cautiously, we are clear. No pursuit detected. No pursuit. Of course not. Varel's eyes narrowed slightly. They didn't need to follow us, he said quietly. The words settled heavily over the crew. Because they all understood what he meant. If the humans had wanted them destroyed, they would not have escaped. Not even for a second. Begin a full diagnostic, Varel ordered. I want confirmation that no foreign systems remain embedded in our network. The officers hesitated. Commander, the systems engineer said slowly, we already ran preliminary checks during the jump. And? A pause. We found nothing. Varel turned his head slightly. Nothing. No foreign code. No traceable intrusion. No residual signal patterns. That's impossible. Yes, Commander, the officer replied. And that was the problem. Varel stared at the data streaming across the console. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. They accessed every system we have, Varel said. Overrode our sensors. Controlled our interface. And now you're telling me there's no trace. The engineer swallowed. Yes, Commander. Silence followed. Cold. Unsettling. Run it again, Varel said. We have. Repeatedly. Varel didn't respond. Because deep down, he already understood. They hadn't just accessed the ship. They had done it so cleanly. It was as if they had never been there at all. A perfect intrusion. A perfect exit. Commander, the tactical officer spoke up hesitantly. If they can do that, then they could have shut us down completely, Varel finished. No one argued. Because it was true. The realization spread slowly through the crew. Like a shadow creeping across the room. The humans hadn't just demonstrated power. They had demonstrated restraint. And restraint meant choice. Varel exhaled slowly. Record everything, he said. Every system fluctuation. Every signal anomaly. I want a full report prepared for High Command. Yes, Commander. The officers moved quickly now, eager for direction. For purpose. But Varel's thoughts remained elsewhere. Back in that moment. That voice. That certainty. Choose your next actions carefully. It hadn't been a threat. Not directly. But it had carried weight. Meaning. Implication. They knew who we were, the navigation officer said quietly. Varel didn't look at him. Yes. They knew our capabilities. Yes. A pause. Then why let us go? That question lingered. Unanswered. Uncomfortable. Varel finally turned. Because they wanted us to leave. The officer frowned slightly. That doesn't make sense. If we were a threat. We weren't. The words came sharp. Definitive. The officer fell silent. Varel stepped forward, his gaze hardening. That vessel, whatever it truly is, it could have destroyed us before we even realized we were targeted. No one disagreed. You saw the projections, Varel continued. Every possible movement path. Every defensive response. Already calculated. Already counted. He paused. They weren't reacting to us. A slow realization spread. They were ahead of us, someone whispered. Varel nodded slightly. Far ahead. The bridge fell quiet again. Because now, they weren't just dealing with superior technology. They were dealing with something worse. Superiority in understanding. In prediction. In control. Commander, the sensor officer said slowly, what if this wasn't just a warning? Varel's eyes narrowed. Explain. The officer hesitated. What if it was a message? The idea hung in the air. Heavy. Dangerous. Varel considered it. Then, continue. The officer gestured toward the display, pulling up the recorded data from the encounter. They allowed us to scan them, he said. At first. Yes. They didn't interfere immediately. They let us see enough. Varel didn't respond. Because he had noticed that too. They showed us their capabilities, the officer continued. Not all of them, but enough to understand the gap between us. A slow, creeping realization began to form. They wanted us to report back, the officer finished. Silence. Total. Absolute. Varel stared at the data. At the layers of hidden systems. At the overwhelming power that had been only partially revealed. And suddenly, it made sense. They didn't just let us go, Varel said quietly. They sent us. The words hit harder than anything before. Because now, the encounter had a purpose. A design. A strategy. The humans had not acted randomly. They had calculated everything. From the first scan. To the final warning. They wanted the Dominion to know, Varel continued. To understand. To see. A chill ran through the bridge. Why? Someone asked. Varel didn't answer immediately. Because the answer was far more unsettling than the question. Because, he said slowly, they are not afraid of us. No one moved. No one spoke. They didn't see us as a threat, Varel continued. They saw us as an audience. The weight of that statement pressed down on every being present. Audience. Not enemy. Not rival. Something lesser. Something observing. Something being shown. Commander, the communications officer said, voice tight, if that's true, then what are they preparing for? Varel's gaze drifted back to the void outside the viewport. Endless. Dark. Unforgiving. The human ship had been alone. No fleet. No escort. No visible support. And yet, it had acted with complete confidence. Absolute control. As if it didn't need anything else. They built that vessel for a reason, Varel said quietly. No one interrupted. They concealed its true nature. Suppressed its power. Masked its capabilities. A pause. Not to hide from us. Another pause. But from something else. The bridge went still. Completely still. Because now, the question had changed. It was no longer, what are humans capable of? Now it was, what are humans afraid of? Varel felt the shift in his own thoughts. The realization settling deeper. He had spent his entire career studying threats. Analyzing enemies. Preparing for conflict. But this was different. This was something larger. Something beyond standard warfare. Prepare an encrypted transmission, Varel ordered. The communications officer straightened instantly. To high command. Yes. What priority level? Varel didn't hesitate. Maximum. A flicker of surprise crossed the officer's face. Commander, that level is reserved for. I am aware, Varel cut him off. A brief silence followed. Then, yes, Commander. The officer turned back to his console, beginning the transmission protocol. Varel remained still. Watching. Thinking. Calculating. Because now, everything had changed. This was no longer a routine observation mission. No longer a simple classification of a developing species. This was the beginning of something else. Something far more dangerous. And far more important. Varel exhaled slowly. then spoke the words that would echo far beyond this ship. Far beyond this moment. Far beyond everything they thought they understood. "Transmit the following," he said. The officer paused, ready to record. Varel's voice was calm, measured. But beneath it, something had shifted. Something real. Humanity is not to be provoked. A pause. Then, under any circumstances. The transmission was sent. And with it, a warning. Not just to the Dominion, but to the entire galaxy. Though none of them knew it yet. This was not a message of fear. It was a message of survival. Varel Corin stood in silence as the stars drifted slowly beyond the viewport. And for the first time, he was no longer thinking about what the humans could do. He was thinking about why. They hadn't done it yet. The Kelverin capital world did not sleep. It pulsed. A living monument of power and control, the planet Velka Prime gleamed beneath twin stars, its vast city structures stretching across continents in perfect geometric precision. Towers of black alloy pierced the upper atmosphere, their surfaces etched with the victories of 1,000 campaigns. At the center of it all, the War Spire, a colossal structure of obsidian and light, where the fate of entire systems was decided in quiet conversations and calculated silence. And today, it was not quiet. Commander Varel Corin stood at the entrance of the Grand Chamber, flanked by armored sentinels. The massive doors loomed before him, sealed. Waiting. He could feel it even from here. Tension. Not the controlled, strategic tension of military planning, but something sharper. Uneasy. Uncertain. "Commander Corin," one of the sentinels said, "the council is prepared." Varel nodded once. The doors opened. The chamber beyond was vast. Circular. Tiered. At its center hovered a massive holographic table, displaying rotating star systems, fleet positions, and data streams that shifted in real time. Surrounding it, 13 figures. The ruling warlords of the Kelverin Dominion. Each one a veteran of countless conflicts. Each one a master of strategy, conquest, and annihilation. At the highest tier sat the one who commanded them all. Grand Warlord Threx Valn. Ancient. Scarred. Unmoving. His golden eyes locked onto Varel the moment he entered. "Commander Corin," Threx said, his voice deep and measured, "you have interrupted ongoing operations with a priority transmission." Varel stepped forward. "I have, Grand Warlord." A ripple of murmurs spread across the chamber. Not approval. Not yet. "Then speak," Threx said. "And justify it." Varel didn't hesitate. He raised his hand. The chamber dimmed. The holographic table shifted. And the image appeared. The human vessel. Still. Silent. Deceptive. "This," Varel said, "is a Terran military asset." A low murmur passed through the warlords. "Small," one of them scoffed. "Unremarkable," said another. "Why are we here for this?" Varel didn't react. "Because," he said calmly, "it is not what it appears to be." With a gesture, he activated the scan data. The image fractured. Layers peeled back. The true structure revealed. Mass. Density. Hidden systems. The murmurs stopped. Completely. "That is not possible," one warlord said sharply. "It is confirmed," Varel replied. The data continued. Weapons. Hundreds of them. Buried within the ship's structure. Exaggerated projections, another warlord snapped. Sensor distortion. "They detected us," Varel interrupted. Silence. Threx leaned forward slightly. "Explain." Varel met his gaze. "They detected our presence through active stealth fields. Overrode our scanning systems. Took control of our interface." The chamber went still. "That is unlikely," one warlord said slowly. Varel's voice didn't change. "They locked targeting solutions on our vessel." A pause. "How many?" Threx asked. Varel didn't blink. "All of them." The weight of that statement settled heavily. "They predicted every possible maneuver we could make," Varel continued. "Before we made it." A flicker of unease passed through the chamber. Subtle. But real. And yet, Threx said slowly, you stand before us. Varel nodded once. Yes. Then they chose not to engage. Yes. Threx's eyes narrowed. Why? That question hung in the air. Varel let the silence stretch. Then. Because we were not the threat. The reaction was immediate. That is absurd. Arrogant speculation. Humans lack the capability. They demonstrated it, Varel said sharply. The chamber fell silent again. Because this time, there was no uncertainty in his voice. They allowed us to scan them, Varel continued. They allowed us to see their capabilities. Then they took control of the situation and released us. He paused. They sent us back. A slow, creeping tension began to build. Threx leaned back slightly, studying him. You believe this was intentional? I do. For what purpose? Varel's gaze swept across the chamber. Each warlord. Each expression. Some skeptical. Some irritated. Some concerned. To deliver a message, he said. And what message is that? Threx asked. Varel didn't hesitate. That humanity is not to be challenged. A few warlords scoffed. Others shifted uncomfortably. And you believe this? One of them demanded. Varel met his gaze. I know it. The chamber grew colder. Because belief could be dismissed. But certainty was harder to ignore. Threx remained silent for a long moment. Then, there have been discussions, he said slowly, regarding human expansion. Varel's eyes narrowed slightly. Expansion. Yes, another warlord spoke. They have increased fleet production over the last cycle. Fortifying systems. Reinforcing borders. That is not expansion, Varel said. It is preparation. A pause. For what? Threx asked. Varel exhaled slowly. And here was the turning point. I do not know, he admitted. A ripple of reaction passed through the chamber. Some seized on it immediately. So you bring us fear without answers. Speculation without proof. Unacceptable. I bring you a warning, Varel said, cutting through the noise. His voice didn't rise. But it carried. They are not behaving like a species preparing for conquest. That slowed them. They are not expanding their territory, Varel continued. They are not engaging neighboring systems. They are not asserting dominance. A pause. They are consolidating. The word landed. Heavy. Strategic. Intentional. Threx's eyes narrowed further. Explain. Varel gestured to the display. New data appeared. Human territory maps. Fleet distributions. Defense grids. Over the last 50 cycles, Varel said, humanity has increased its military output by over 300%. A murmur. They have constructed orbital defenses around every major colony. Another murmur. They have established rapid response fleets within every sector. Silence. They are not spreading outward. Varel's voice dropped slightly. They are building inward. Now. No one spoke. Because now. It wasn't just about power. It was about intent. Why? Threx asked again. Varel held his gaze. And this time. There was no hesitation. Because they are expecting something. The words echoed through the chamber. Something unseen. Something unknown. Something big enough to make a species like humanity stop expanding. And start preparing. That is conjecture, one warlord said, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Yes, Varel replied. Then. No. The chamber stilled again. Varel stepped forward. There is one more detail. Threx's eyes locked onto him. Speak. Varel hesitated. Just for a moment. Because what he was about to say would change everything. They were not surprised to see us, he said. A pause. They were not alarmed. Another pause. They were not concerned. Silence. They were waiting. That word lingered. Uncomfortable. Unsettling. Threx's expression didn't change, but something in his gaze sharpened. Waiting for what? He asked quietly. Varel didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't know. Not yet. But he could feel it. That same instinct from before. That same quiet certainty. They built that ship for a reason, Varel said slowly. No one interrupted. And whatever that reason is. He paused. Then finished. It is not us. The chamber fell into complete silence. For the first time in generations. The War Council had no immediate response. No strategy. No countermeasure. Only a single, growing realization. They had spent centuries preparing for war against lesser species. Against rivals. Against threats they understood. But this was something else. Something outside their expectations. Something already in motion. Grand Warlord Threx Valn remained still for a long time. Then finally, he spoke. Begin full-spectrum intelligence sweeps of all human-controlled space. The order carried weight. Finality. I want every transmission analyzed. Every fleet movement tracked. His gaze shifted back to Varel. And you, Commander Corin. Varel straightened. You will lead this investigation. A pause. You will find out what humanity is preparing for. The words settled heavily. Because now, this was no longer observation. No longer speculation. This was something far more dangerous. A search. For a truth humanity had chosen not to share. Varel inclined his head slightly. As you command. But as he turned to leave, one thought lingered in his mind. Unshakable. Unavoidable. If humanity, a species capable of building something like that, was preparing for war, then what kind of enemy would require it? The data did not make sense. That was the first conclusion Commander Varel Corin reached after 72 continuous cycles of analysis. It wasn't incomplete. It wasn't corrupted. It was consistent. And that was the problem. Aboard the Dominion intelligence vessel Silent Directive, Varel stood alone in the observation chamber, staring at a rotating holographic map of human-controlled space. Dozens of systems. Hundreds of colonies. Thousands of orbital installations. All connected. All fortified. All static. They should be expanding, Varel murmured. Behind him, the intelligence officer shifted slightly. Commander. Varel didn't turn. Every dominant species follows the same pattern, he said. Expansion. Resource acquisition. Territorial dominance. He gestured toward the display. This is not that. The officer stepped closer, studying the map. Human territory was clearly defined. Bordered. Contained. And yet, within those borders, activity surged. Fleet production has increased by another 12%, the officer said. Shipyards operating beyond standard capacity. Resource allocation redirected almost entirely toward military infrastructure. Varel's eyes narrowed. And still no outward movement. None. A pause. No invasions. No territorial disputes. No expansion attempts. Silence stretched between them. Because now, the pattern wasn't just unusual. It was deliberate. Varel tapped a command into the console. The map shifted. New overlays appeared. Defense grids. Sensor networks. Response times. Every system is layered, Varel said quietly. Redundant defenses. Overlapping coverage. Rapid deployment capability within minutes. The officer frowned slightly. That's excessive. Yes. Another command. More data. Outer colonies reinforced beyond necessity. Another layer. Inner systems fortified to levels typically reserved for wartime conditions. Another. Civilian infrastructure integrated with military response protocols. The officer's expression tightened. This isn't preparation for conquest, he said slowly. Varel nodded. No. A pause. Then. It's preparation for survival. The words lingered. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Varel turned at last, facing the officer. Show me long-range scans beyond human borders. The officer complied. The map zoomed outward. Beyond known space. Into the dark. Empty regions. Unclaimed sectors. Unexplored void. Nothing, the officer said. No major activity detected. Standard cosmic background. Minor anomalies consistent with natural phenomena. Varel stepped closer. Zoom further. The officer hesitated. Commander, those regions are beyond our reliable sensor range. Do it. The display shifted again. Resolution dropped. Data became sparse. But still. Nothing. Just darkness. Endless. Featureless. Silent. Varel stared at it. Longer than necessary. Because something about it felt wrong. They're not expanding outward, Varel said slowly. No, the officer confirmed. They're building inward. Yes. Varel's gaze remained fixed on the dark regions beyond human space. Then whatever they're preparing for. He paused. It's not here. The officer frowned. Commander. Varel didn't answer immediately, because the thought forming in his mind wasn't comforting. It wasn't logical. But it was there. Persistent. Unavoidable. What if, Varel said quietly, they're not preparing to fight something inside their territory? A pause. The officer blinked. Then what? Varel turned slowly. What if they're preparing for something coming toward it? Silence. Total. Absolute. The officer shook his head slightly. That would imply. I know what it implies. Varel stepped forward again, his movements slow, deliberate. A threat large enough to justify this level of preparation. A threat they cannot avoid. A threat they expect. Each sentence tightened the tension in the room. But there's no evidence of such a threat, the officer argued. No recorded incursions. No signals. No. They're hiding it. The words came quietly, but with certainty. The officer froze. Commander, that would require a level of control over information we have not accounted for, Varel finished. He turned back to the display. To hide something on that scale, across that many systems. A pause. They would need absolute coordination. Another pause. And absolute discipline. The officer's expression shifted. From confusion to realization. That's not consistent with previous human behavior, he said slowly. No, Varel agreed. Humans were chaotic. Divided. Unpredictable. Another pause. Not anymore. Varel tapped another command. Historical data appeared. Human development timelines. Technological progression curves. Military expansion rates. At first, everything followed expected patterns. Gradual advancement. Incremental improvement. Nothing unusual. Then, a shift. 50 cycles ago. The curve spiked. Dramatically. Technological breakthroughs. Rapid. Unnatural. Ship designs evolving faster than theoretical models allowed. Weapon systems surpassing known limitations. Infrastructure scaling beyond logistical predictions. What caused this? The officer asked. Varel didn't answer. Because the answer was becoming clear. They didn't just advance, Varel said slowly. They accelerated. Another pause. And they did it all at once. The officer's voice dropped. That's not natural progression. No. Varel's gaze hardened. That's adaptation. The room fell silent. Because now, the implications were unavoidable. Species adapted under pressure. Under threat. Under necessity. Not for no reason. Not without cause. They encountered something, the officer said quietly. Varel nodded. Yes. And instead of announcing it, they prepared. Silence. Varel walked slowly around the holographic display, his mind racing. They increased production. They fortified every system. They centralized command structures. They eliminated inefficiencies. He stopped. They changed. The officer swallowed. Into what? Varel didn't answer immediately, because the answer was unsettling. A species that expects war, he said finally. The display shifted again, returning to the image of the human vessel. That single ship. The one that had changed everything. It wasn't just powerful, Varel said. It was optimized. The officer frowned. For what? Varel's eyes narrowed. Endurance. Another pause. Survivability. Another. Adaptability. The officer's expression tightened. That's not how you design a ship for standard warfare. No. Varel stepped closer. That's how you design a ship for something you don't fully understand. The realization hit fully now. Clear. Cold. Unavoidable. They don't know what they're fighting, the officer whispered. Varel nodded slowly. No. A pause. But they know it's coming. The chamber fell silent again. But this time, it was different. Heavier. More focused. Because now, the mystery wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't theoretical. It had shape, direction, meaning. And it pointed outward, into the dark. Varel turned away from the display. Prepare a deep-range probe. The officer blinked. Commander, into uncharted space. Yes. That's beyond Dominion jurisdiction. Yes. A pause. And potentially dangerous. Varel's expression didn't change. I'm aware. The officer hesitated. Then, yes, Commander. As the preparations began, Varel remained still, his gaze drifting once more to the edge of known space, to the darkness beyond, to the place where something unseen might already be moving. Because now, the question was no longer, why are humans so strong? Now it was, what forced them to become this way? And somewhere, far beyond the borders of every known civilization, the answer waited. The probe lasted exactly 17 minutes. That alone was enough to unsettle Commander Varel Korin. Dominion deep-range probes were designed to endure centuries. They could survive radiation storms, gravitational shear, even partial system failure. 17 minutes was not failure. It was interruption. Replay the transmission, Varel said. The chamber lights dimmed. The holographic display activated. And the final data feed from the probe unfolded in front of them. At first, nothing. Just static. Background radiation. Cosmic noise. Signal degradation began at 12 minutes, the technician reported. Unidentified interference patterns. Varel didn't respond. He was watching. Waiting. Because something about the signal felt wrong. The static shifted. Subtly at first. Then, it organized. Patterns. Not random. Not natural. Enhance, Varel ordered. The system complied. The noise clarified. And the first image appeared. A field of debris. Massive. Endless. Wreckage drifting in the void. The scale was immediately apparent. These are not natural formations, the technician said quietly. Varel didn't need confirmation. He could see it. Hull fragments. Structural beams. Broken sections of ships. Ships far larger than anything in the Dominion fleet. Zoom in. The image tightened. Details sharpened. And the unease deepened. These designs, the officer murmured, they don't match any known species. Varel's eyes narrowed. No, they didn't. The structures were wrong. Angles that shouldn't exist. Surfaces that twisted in unnatural ways. Geometry that felt unstable. As if the ships had not been built, but grown. Damage analysis, Varel said. The system processed. Then displayed the results. And the room went cold. Structural failure patterns are inconsistent with known weapon types, the technician said, voice tightening. No evidence of standard energy discharge. No kinetic impact signatures. Varel stepped closer. What caused this? The technician hesitated. Unknown. Varel's gaze hardened. Define the damage. A pause. Then. Sections appear, removed. Removed. Yes, Commander. Entire portions of the hull are missing. Not destroyed. Not fragmented. Another pause. Gone. Silence. The feed continued. The probe drifting slowly through the debris field. Past shattered remains. Past twisted metal. Past something else. Hold. Varel raised his hand. The image froze. There, he said. The technician adjusted the view. Zooming in. And then. They saw it. Not wreckage. Not debris. Something intact. Partially. A structure. Floating. Dark. Unmoving. What is that? The officer whispered. Varel didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Advance frame by frame. The image moved again. Slow. Deliberate. The structure grew larger. Closer. More defined. And more wrong. It didn't resemble a ship. Not entirely. It had a hull. But it wasn't smooth. It was layered. Segmented. Like overlapping plates. Organic. Mechanical. Both. Neither. It's alive, someone whispered. No, another said quickly. It's a construct. Varel didn't speak. Because neither answer felt correct. The probe drifted closer. Sensors scanning. Recording. Analyzing. And then. Commander. The technician's voice trembled. Energy readings detected. Varel's eyes snapped to the data. From where? From the structure. Silence. That's not possible, someone said. It's inactive, another added. It has to be. Varel didn't move. Is it powering up? The technician shook his head slowly. No. A pause. Then. It's already active. The room went still. Because that meant. This thing. Whatever it was. Had been sitting there. Among the wreckage. Unmoving. Undetected. Alive. Scan for life signatures, Varel ordered. The system responded instantly. Then. Paused. Result. Varel pressed. The technician swallowed. Inconclusive. Inconclusive. Yes. A longer pause. It's not reading as biological. Another pause. But it's not reading as mechanical either. Silence. The probe continued drifting. Closer. Closer. And then. The feed flickered. Signal instability increasing, the technician said quickly. Maintain lock, Varel ordered. I'm trying. The image distorted. Lines bending. Shapes warping. As if reality itself was struggling to hold form. What's happening? Someone asked. No idea. Then. The structure moved. It was subtle. Almost imperceptible. But it happened. A shift. A ripple across its surface. As if something beneath it had awakened. Commander, the technician whispered. Varel didn't answer. He was watching. Because now, there was no doubt. This thing was not dead. The feed zoomed slightly, automatically adjusting focus. And that's when they saw it. The surface was not solid. It was layered. Segments sliding over each other. Breathing. Expanding. Contracting. Distance. Varel asked. Too close, the officer replied immediately. Pull back. I'm trying. Control is delayed. The probe hesitated. Just for a second. Too long. The structure reacted. There was no flash. No explosion. No visible weapon. Just movement. Fast. Violent. Impossible. One moment. It was still. The next. It wasn't. Something extended from its surface. A shape. A limb. A tendril. Varel couldn't tell. It didn't follow geometry. It didn't follow physics. It just was. The feed cut to static. Silence. Complete. Total. Then, for a single frame, the image returned. Distorted. Fragmented. But visible. And in that frame, they saw something else. Inside the structure. Shapes. Figures. Twisted. Elongated. Not one species. Many. Fragments of armor. Remnants of forms. Bodies. Changed. Rewritten. Repurposed. Then, the signal died. The room remained silent long after the feed ended. No one spoke. No one moved. Because no one knew what to say. Varel stood motionless. His mind replaying the final moments. The movement. The structure. The things inside it. And one thought. Louder than all the others. That wasn't a battlefield. The words came quietly. But they carried. The officers turned. Slowly. What do you mean? One asked. Varel's gaze remained fixed on the now dark display. That debris field. A pause. Was not the result of a war. Another pause. It was the result of something feeding. Silence. Deep. Unshakable. Commander, the technician said weakly, what was that thing? Varel didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't know. Not fully. But he understood enough. Enough to recognize what they were dealing with. It wasn't a ship, he said finally. Another pause. It was something wearing one. The room went cold. Varel turned slowly. His expression had changed. No longer analytical. No longer curious. Now, focused. Sharp. Certain. Prepare a secure transmission, he said. The officer blinked. To the War Council. Varel shook his head. No. A pause. Then. To the humans. The room froze. You want to contact them? Someone asked, disbelief clear in their voice. Varel met his gaze. Yes. Commander, that's necessary. Silence. Because now, everything had changed. This was no longer about understanding human strength, or predicting their intentions, or preparing for potential conflict. This was something else. They had seen it. The thing in the dark. The thing beyond the borders of known space. The thing that had already destroyed something greater than them. And now, there was only one question left. Had humanity been preparing for this? Because they had already fought it. Varel Corin exhaled slowly. And for the first time, he felt it clearly. Not uncertainty. Not confusion. Not even fear. Urgency. Open the channel, he said. Because whatever that thing was, whatever it had done, whatever it was becoming, it was not staying out there forever. And when it came, the galaxy would not be ready, unless humanity already was. The channel opened without resistance. That alone was wrong. Commander Varel Corin had expected encryption barriers, defensive firewalls, layered security protocols, something that would delay, question, or deny access. Instead, the connection formed instantly, clean, direct, as if it had been waiting. A single visual feed appeared on the main display. Dark, minimal, controlled. Then, a figure resolved. Human. Standing in a dimly lit command chamber. Still. Composed. Watching. Kelverin vessel, the human said. No introduction. No hesitation. You took longer than expected. The words struck like a blade. Varel stepped forward slowly. You knew we would contact you. It wasn't a question. The human's expression didn't change. Yes. Silence followed. Because now, the balance of the conversation had already shifted. Identify yourself, Varel said. A brief pause. Then, Captain Adrian Voss, commanding officer of the Terran warship Aegis Directive. Varel's eyes narrowed slightly. Different ship. Different command. Same tone. Same certainty. You encountered it, Voss said. Again. Not a question. Varel didn't respond immediately. Because the implication was clear. They knew. Yes, Varel said finally. A pause. Then. What did we see? For the first time. The human's gaze shifted. Not uncertainty. Not fear. Recognition. You saw what's left behind, Voss said. The words were calm. Too calm. Varel's voice hardened slightly. That was not a battlefield. No, Voss agreed. Another pause. It wasn't. Silence stretched between them. Heavy. Loaded. Because both sides now understood. There was no need for pretense. What is it? Varel asked. Voss didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, issuing a silent command off-screen. The lighting in his chamber shifted. And then, the display changed. New data appeared. Not from Kelverin systems. Not from the probe. Human records. Classified. Restricted. Unfiltered. This is from our first confirmed encounter, Voss said. Varel felt a subtle tension tighten in his chest. Because something in the human's tone had changed. Not fear. Not panic. Something worse. Memory. Play it, Voss said. The recording began. At first, it looked ordinary. A human fleet. Formation tight. Weapons ready. Ships moving through the same debris field Varel had seen. Initial contact was misclassified. Voss's voice continued over the footage. We believed it to be derelict structures. The image shifted. Zooming in. Focusing on the same thing. The structure. Still. Silent. We approached within standard engagement distance. The fleet slowed. Scanning. Analyzing. Unaware. Varel's claws tightened slightly. Because he already knew. What came next? It moved. The footage shook violently. One moment. Stillness. The next. Chaos. The structure unfolded. Not opened. Not activated. Unfolded. As if reality itself bent to accommodate it. Segments split. Shifted. Expanded. And from within. Something emerged. Shapes. Multiple. Fast. Unnatural. The human fleet opened fire. Energy beams struck. And vanished. Kinetic rounds impacted. And dissolved. It adapted instantly, Voss said. The thing moved. Not through space. Not across it. But through it. One moment. Distant. The next. Inside the formation. Ships didn't explode. They didn't break apart. They collapsed. Hull integrity failed inwards. Metal twisted. Compressed. As if something invisible had gripped them and crushed them from within. Commander, one of Varel's officers whispered. But Varel didn't respond. He couldn't. Because he was watching. The recording zoomed again. Closer. Too close. One of the human ships. Boarded. No breach. No entry point. Just presence. Inside the corridors. Something moved. Fast. Blurred. Wrong. The camera feed from a soldier's helmet flickered into view. Breathing. Heavy. Erratic. What is that? The voice cut off. A sound followed. Not mechanical. Not biological. Something in between. A scream. Then silence. The feed cut. Another feed replaced it. Bridge view. Panic. Systems failing. Crew shouting. It's inside the systems. Shut it down. I can't. Displays warped. Data twisted. Language. Corrupted. It learns, Voss said quietly. The final sequence began. The largest human ship. Attempted to retreat. Engines flaring. Jump drive charging. Too late. The thing reached it. Not physically. Something else. The hull. Aged. In seconds. Metal corroded. Structures weakened. Systems decayed. As if time itself had been accelerated. Then, nothing. The ship disintegrated. The recording ended. Silence. Total. Unbreakable. Varel stood motionless. His mind trying to process what he had just seen. That was one encounter, Voss said. His voice steady. Controlled. But beneath it, something strained. How many? Varel asked. A pause. Enough. The answer was worse than any number. What do you call it? Varel pressed. Another pause. We don't know what it is, Voss said. Silence. But we gave it a name. Varel's gaze locked onto him. The abyssals. The word lingered. Heavy. Ancient. Wrong. What are they? Varel asked quietly. Voss didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was worse than any explanation. We don't think they're a species, he said finally. A pause. We think they're what's left. Varel's mind froze. Left of what? Voss's eyes didn't waver. Everything that came before us. Silence consumed the chamber. Because now, the scale had changed. Completely. This wasn't an enemy. This wasn't a war. This was something else. Something older. Something patient. Something already winning. They don't invade, Voss continued. They don't conquer. Another pause. They erase. The word hit harder than anything before. Varel felt it now. Fully. Clearly. Not fear. Understanding. And they're coming, Voss said. No hesitation. No doubt. Toward us. The void beyond the viewport felt darker now. Heavier. Closer. Varel exhaled slowly. Because now, everything made sense. The ships. The defenses. The secrecy. Humanity wasn't preparing for war. They were preparing for extinction. And they intended to survive it. Varel lifted his gaze. What do you need? He asked. For the first time. The human captain didn't answer immediately. Because the answer would change everything. We need time, Voss said. A pause. And we're running out of it. The transmission remained open. But neither side spoke. Because both now understood. This was no longer about species. No longer about dominance. No longer about power. This was about survival. And the thing coming did not care who ruled the galaxy. Only that something was left to consume. Silence lingered after the recording ended. Not the quiet of uncertainty, but the kind that follows understanding. Commander Varel Korin stood motionless, his gaze locked on the now dark display. The echoes of the footage still burned in his mind, the collapsing ships, the distorted corridors, the thing that didn't move through space. But ignored it. Across the channel, Captain Adrian Voss remained still, watching. Waiting. Because now, there were no more illusions left to break. You've known about them for how long? Varel asked. His voice was steady. But heavier now. Voss exhaled slowly. 83 standard cycles since first signal anomaly. Varel's eyes narrowed. Signal anomaly. Voss nodded slightly. We didn't find them first. A pause. They found us. The words settled deep. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. At the edge of explored space, Voss continued, we started picking up distortions. Nothing obvious. Nothing aggressive. Just inconsistencies. Define inconsistencies, Varel said. Ships going silent, Voss replied. Entire expeditions disappearing without debris. Communication logs cutting mid-transmission. A pause. At first, we blamed pirates. Then unknown species. Then equipment failure. Varel's expression hardened slightly. And then? Voss looked directly at him. We found the first graveyard. Varel's claws tightened. Like the one we saw. Yes. Another pause. But smaller. That didn't make it better. What changed? Varel asked. Voss didn't hesitate. We sent more ships. A brief, bitter edge crept into his voice. More sensors. More weapons. More confidence. Another pause. And they all died. Silence. Varel processed that. Not just the loss, but the pattern. You escalated, he said. Yes. And it didn't matter. No. The simplicity of that answer carried weight. Because escalation was the foundation of every military doctrine in the galaxy. And here, it meant nothing. What did you learn? Varel asked. Voss's gaze shifted slightly, as if recalling something distant. Everything we thought we knew about warfare, he said slowly, stopped applying. A pause. They don't fight like we do. Another. They don't think like we do. Another. They don't even exist the same way we do. Varel felt that. Deep. Because he had seen it too. In the footage. In the probe feed. In the way reality itself seemed to bend around them. They adapt, Varel said quietly. Voss nodded. Faster than we can respond. A pause. They learn from every engagement. Every weapon. Every tactic. Another pause. And once they understand it. Varel finished the sentence. It stops working. Yes. The room fell silent again. Because now, the threat wasn't just powerful. It was evolving. So you changed your approach, Varel said. Voss's expression hardened slightly. We had to. The display flickered again. New data appeared. Human ship designs. Older models. Simpler. Less refined. Then, newer ones. More complex. More layered. More resilient. We stopped building ships for dominance, Voss said. Another image appeared. A vessel, heavily armored, layered systems, redundant cores. We started building them to last. More designs followed. Each one more advanced than the last. But not in the way Varel expected. Not faster. Not stronger. Smarter. Every system is redundant, Voss continued. Every failure point has a backup. Every weapon system is modular. A pause. We don't rely on one advantage anymore. Another pause. Because they take advantages away. Varel's mind moved quickly. Connecting patterns. Understanding the shift. You didn't just upgrade your technology, he said. Voss nodded. We changed our entire doctrine. The weight of that statement was enormous. Because doctrine defined everything. Strategy. Tactics. Identity. You centralized command, Varel said. Yes. You reduced internal conflict. Yes. You prioritized survival over expansion. Voss didn't hesitate. Yes. Varel exhaled slowly. Because now, the full picture was forming. You weren't preparing for war, he said. A pause. You were preparing to endure one. Voss held his gaze. Exactly. Silence. Varel turned slightly, his thoughts racing. You said they're coming, he said. Yes. How do you know? Voss didn't answer immediately. Because the answer was worse than anything before. We've already lost systems, he said. The words hit like a shockwave. Varel froze. Lost. Voss nodded once. Outer colonies. Listening posts. Entire fleets. A pause. No survivors. The room felt smaller. Tighter. Because now, this wasn't a distant threat. This wasn't something theoretical. It had already begun. How long? Varel asked. Voss's expression didn't change. Based on current projections. A pause. Less than a decade. Varel's mind went still. 10 years. For a threat that had already destroyed unknown civilizations. That adapted instantly. That erased fleets. 10 years wasn't time. It was nothing. And the rest of the galaxy? Varel asked. Voss gave a quiet, humorless exhale. They don't know. Silence. Why not tell them? Varel demanded. They wouldn't believe us, Voss replied immediately. Another pause. And if they did? He looked directly at Varel. They would react exactly the way your council is about to. Varel didn't argue. Because he knew. Denial. Debate. Delay. Time. Wasted. So you stayed silent, Varel said. Yes. Prepared alone. Yes. A pause. Why show us now? That question hung in the air. Heavy. Critical. Voss didn't answer immediately. Because this was the turning point. Because you found it, he said finally. Varel's expression tightened. You crossed the line, Voss continued. You saw what's out there. A pause. You can't unsee it. Silence. And now, Voss said, you have a choice. Varel felt it. The weight of it. The shift. What choice? He asked. Voss's voice dropped slightly. You can go back to your people, he said, and try to convince them. A pause. Or you can ignore it. Another pause. Like everyone else would. Varel's claws tightened. And if they don't listen? He asked. Voss held his gaze. Then you won't have to worry about it for long. Silence. Because now, there was no more uncertainty. No more speculation. No more doubt. The truth was clear. The enemy was real. It was coming. And the galaxy was not ready. Varel exhaled slowly. Because now, the mission had changed. Completely. This was no longer about intelligence. Or analysis. Or strategy. This was about survival. Not just for the Dominion. Not just for humanity. For everything. Varel straightened. Then I will make them listen, he said. Voss studied him for a long moment. Then, a single, small nod. Good, he said. A pause. Because we can't do this alone. The transmission began to fade. But before it cut, Voss spoke one last time. Move fast, Commander. The channel closed. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same. Because now, Varel knew. The war wasn't coming. It had already started. And the clock was already running. The return to Velka Prime felt different. Commander Varel Korin had stood in orbit above the capital world many times before, watching its vast cities shimmer beneath the twin stars, feeling the quiet certainty of a civilization at the peak of its power. Today, there was no certainty, only pressure. Requesting immediate audience with the War Council, Varel said as his vessel entered final approach. The response came quickly. Too quickly. Request acknowledged. Emergency session already in progress. You are expected. Varel's eyes narrowed slightly. They're already debating, he murmured. Commander? The pilot asked. Nothing, Varel replied. Take us down. The descent was swift. The war spire loomed once more, unchanged in appearance. But Varel knew better. Because now, the meaning behind it had shifted. The chamber doors opened before he reached them. No ceremony. No delay. Inside. Voices were already raised. You propose we mobilize fleets based on unverified data. Unverified. We have sensor logs. Sensor logs from a single commander. That commander has never reported false intelligence. And now he reports ghosts in the void. Varel stepped forward. The room didn't quiet immediately. That alone told him everything. They were divided. Grand Warlord Threx Valn raised a hand. Silence fell instantly. Korin, he said. Varel stopped at the center of the chamber. I have new information. A ripple of tension spread. Speak, Threx ordered. Varel didn't hesitate. They are real. No build-up. No explanation. Just truth. A murmur rose. Based on what? One warlord demanded. Varel raised his hand. The display activated. And the footage appeared. The human recording. The chamber fell silent. Not gradually. Not reluctantly. Instantly. Because this was not speculation. Ships collapsing. Corridors distorting. Something moving where nothing should move. The footage ended. No one spoke. Not for several long seconds. Finally, One warlord exhaled sharply. This could be fabricated. Varel turned to him slowly. You believe that? The warlord hesitated. Because belief was harder now. It aligns with our probe data, Varel continued. The wreckage. The energy distortions. The structural anomalies. A pause. This is not a deception. Another warlord leaned forward. If this is true. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Threx's gaze remained fixed on the display. Time frame, he asked. Varel answered immediately. Less than a decade. The chamber shifted. Not chaos. Not panic. Something worse. Realization. That is not enough time, one warlord said. No, Varel agreed. Silence. Then what do you propose? Another demanded. Varel didn't hesitate. We inform the Galactic Union. The reaction was immediate. Impossible. They will not believe us. They will debate for cycles. And die, Varel cut in. The room went still. Every moment we hesitate, he continued, is time we do not have. A pause. They are already losing systems. That landed. Hard. Humans? One warlord asked. Yes. A longer pause. And they are still preparing. Threx leaned forward slightly. You trust them? It wasn't a question. Varel met his gaze. I trust that they want to survive. Silence. Which means, Varel continued, their actions are not based on fear. Another pause. They are based on knowledge. That shifted things. Because knowledge was harder to dismiss. They have been fighting this, Varel said. Alone. A pause. They will not win alone. The chamber fell silent again. Because now, the implication was clear. Neither would anyone else. What are you suggesting? Threx asked quietly. Varel exhaled slowly. Alliance. The word echoed. Heavy. Unwelcome. Necessary. Across species. One warlord said sharply. Yes. With humans? Another demanded. Yes. Outrage flickered. Resistance surged. They are unpredictable. They are dangerous. They are still here, Varel said. Silence. They have faced this enemy, he continued. They have survived. A pause. They understand it better than we do. No one argued. Because no one could. Threx remained still. Thinking. Calculating. Weighing. If we do this, he said slowly, we reveal weakness. Varel shook his head. No. A pause. We acknowledge reality. That landed. Threx's eyes narrowed slightly. And if the Union refuses? Varel's answer came without hesitation. Then we prepare without them. Silence. Because now, there was no middle ground. Only action. Or extinction. Threx stood. Slowly. Deliberately. The chamber straightened instinctively. For the first time in Dominion history, he said, we face a threat we do not understand. A pause. One that has already destroyed civilizations greater than ours. Another pause. One that cannot be negotiated with. He looked at Varel. And one we cannot defeat alone. The words settled. Final. Unavoidable. Threx turned to the council. We will convene the Galactic Union. A ripple of shock. We will present this evidence. Another ripple. And we will prepare for war. This time, no one spoke. Because the decision had been made. Varel exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not yet. But something close. Because this was the first step. A small one. A fragile one. But necessary. As the chamber began to shift into motion, orders issued, fleets mobilized, transmissions prepared. Varel remained still for just a moment longer. Because he knew. This was not victory. This was not even survival. This was simply the moment the galaxy finally understood. It was already too late to ignore what was coming. And now, they would have to face it. Together. Or not at all.